So Jeffrey is off today, so I have the stage. Woohoo! Um, on occasion, I go up to Milwaukee and I dog sit. And I dog sit for a friend of mine who has in her house 4 organs, a Steinway grand piano, and a 9-foot harpsichord, and a ton of sheet music. So I get to look through the sheet music, and what I'm going to play next is one of the gems I found when I was up there a couple of weeks ago. They are 2 hymn tunes. They're not really hymns, they're hymn tunes. One is Resignation, and it's American, and the other one is called Thaxted, named after a small village in England. It's by Gustav Holst, and it later became the Jupiter theme from the planets. The arranger in a part of the song says to play it like bird calls. And that's appropriate too because it's April and this is the great migration of many, many, many birds that go through Texas and go up north. So Resignation and Thaxted, arranged by Thomas Kiesecker.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Mary. And on that note, I invite you all to just breathe in the gift of spirit. Allow your body to relax in this moment. Allow your mind to just put everything aside. And as you take in another nice deep breath, as you release it, release all that no longer serves you. Allow all stress and tension to just go for now. And allow yourself to be here now. Universal love enfolds me. Universal wisdom inspires me. Universal spirit enlightens me. Universal power encircles me. I am one, and all is well. As we begin this inner healing process, let me invite you to relax in quiet confidence, opening yourself to the miracle-working higher power. Now symbolize the unity of your thinking and feeling nature by touching your chest with your right hand, and let my words act as your own, for your own inner healing, acceptance, and receptivity. I acknowledge that there is a power, intelligence, and wisdom greater than my own. I am in the midst of it, and it is in the midst of me, sensitive and responsive to my every thought, word, action, and feeling. I now make this true for myself by saying aloud, I acknowledge. Acknowledging this higher power working through my life, I admit that I am personally responsible for solving my own problems, while being guided and assisted by something greater than myself. As I am ready to surrender the conflicts of my ego to the wisdom of this infinite presence, I simply speak these words. I surrender. Knowing that forgiveness is the key to unconditional love and the feeling of heaven, I now unconditionally forgive anyone and everyone who has ever injured me in any way, real or imagined. And I now forgive myself for all of my mistaken judgments and their resulting actions. From my deepest level of understanding, I now say, I forgive. Realizing that I continually experience the effects of my own thinking, I now choose to allow this higher power to recreate me deeply, filling my mind with thoughts that are only positive, constructive, loving, and beautiful. I call upon this divine inflow and state aloud, I choose. I now center upon that one special idea that I'm willing to accept as real for me in this coming week. In visualizing that idea as already acted upon and brought to pass, in seeing my idea become a fact of my experience, I enjoy the happiness and peace of my thought fulfilled and gratefully speak these words. I accept. knowing that I have an everlasting place in the midst of the power that sustains all creation, as well as the support of all those around me. I allow myself to relax in the peace of fulfillment and gratitude and say, I release. Now, in my mind's eye, I envision the presence of someone near and dear to me. This can be a friend, a family member, a teacher or mentor, someone who has touched my life in deep and loving ways. Someone who may not be physically present in the room with me this morning. I turn toward that image in my mind's eye and say, I'm grateful for the good in your life. Now I open my eyes, turn to the world around me, and joyfully speak to anyone physically present in the room or virtually on this broadcast, and share in confidence and gratitude in saying, I'm grateful for the good in your life. Well, good morning again, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of our service today. Welcome to Holy Week. Last week, Ramadan began for all of our Muslim brothers and sisters. And this coming week, or what, next Sunday? Next Sunday is Easter Sunday. This Friday is Good Friday. Next Sunday is Easter Sunday. So yes, we have a lot to celebrate, including just being here and being a part of this service and being a part of this world right here, right now. So I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for your love and your energy.
Keeping in line with Holy Week, play spiritual, were you there? And Catholic chant, Stabat Mater Dolorosa. And I knew this as a kid as by the cross.
Okay, speaking of trying times together, we pick up the heroic journey in the second phase. There are more or less 3 steps to each phase. they kind of blend in, and it depends on who you're reading as to how many overall steps there actually are. But it is what's called a monomyth. That is to say that it's found throughout all world cultures. There's a story of a heroic figure, a god king or goddess queen or great warrior or some presence in the culture, sometimes a religious figure as a messiah, who shows everyone else a path by walking it first themselves. Walking it first themselves. And there are stages on this path that it's said that we all go through. Now, the reason I'm telling you these stories and the reason we're doing this series yet again, and I do think I do it about once a year or every couple of years, is because it's your story. It's your story. You know, Danielle mentioned it's Holy Week in the Christian faith. And one of the great awarenesses that was shared with me when I came into New Thought was when somebody said, "Say, have you tried reading the Bible as though it were your own story?" And that had never in a million years occurred to me. And I went to religious schools my whole education. Christian schools, my whole education. And they were wonderful, and they were great to me, and all of the rest of this. But they never told me that. They said, here's a book with stories about ancient people who lived long ago. You might learn something from it. But they never suggested to me that these might be stages of my own consciousness I was reading about. Now, whether that's true, whether this material it would be supernatural, wouldn't it? This material were compiled thousands of years ago just so it could be your story today. But that's where the monomyth comes in. Maybe there's one story and countless variations on it. There's one story of progress in consciousness, from foolishness to wisdom. Okay? And we all walk this. Now, if you'll accept that, at least tentatively, for the next few weeks, this series will make a lot more sense to you than if you don't. Otherwise, it will be a story about distant people long ago and gods and goddesses who came and went on Mount Olympus and all the rest of it. But if you look at it as your story, just for the sake of argument for a while, I think you'll get something out of it. So, bearing that in mind, last week we started with the idea that here you are at home, comfortable, in a familiar space. And even if you're not comfortable, it's familiar. Even if it's claustrophobic, it's familiar. And you're sitting at home, meaning in ordinary waking consciousness, when a knock comes at the door. The door, all of this is figurative. I mean, you can make it literal if you want, but we're starting out with it figurative. So there comes a figurative knock at the figurative door, and I'm going to stop saying that because it's tiresome to keep saying it's figurative. So you get this, right? A knock comes at the door, and you open the door, and you're astonished. This is the next stage of the monomyth, astonishment. There's something standing there, and it depends on which fantasy novel you read as to what exactly it is. But there's something there that you recognize. Actually, you knew it in your youth. It's like your old teacher, your old coach, something from years ago. You recognize this figure. You haven't heard from them in a long time, but you recognize it. And they're there to tell you that it's time for you to join them on an adventure, on a quest, in order to help repair creation in some way. There's trouble afoot, is what they're telling you. And your help is needed. What comes to the mind of this one who's inviting you on this journey? Plus which you're comfortable, or at least in familiar surroundings. You really don't want to go. There's a pot of tea on the stove. You've just made lunch. Your favorite program is coming on television, or whatever. You don't want to go. So you resist. And the resistance is a big part of this, because you get to look at the ambivalent feelings that you have about this call. On the one hand, you're comfortable in everything I just said, and on the other hand, you really want to go, because you're bored out of your mind with your comfortable, familiar reality. It's not working for you. It's stopped kind of working for you. You're ready for some new horizons. So you're torn. And you spend some time being torn. And then you go. And then you go. And you go with this, call it a mentor figure, this energy. And it takes you out of your neighborhood, over the hills and through the woods and down the bike paths and you don't know where you're going. And it's being very, very circuitous in its conversation with you. You're peppering it with questions. Where are we going? What are we going to do when we get there? How does all this work? And basically, the vibe that you're getting back from the mentor is that's for you to figure out. Like you're now the leader of this expedition. You're not only on this expedition, you're the leader of it. And of course, you haven't a clue what any of this is going on. So it's no surprise that you get more and more confused, especially when you come to a threshold to cross, which represents your confusion and looks like the opening of, let's say, a cave or underground passage or subway tunnel or something to that effect, dark corridor, and there's an actual threshold there. And the word threshold, by the way, goes back to the 8th century. It's one of the oldest words in the English language. And it has a root that has to do with stepping. Makes sense. So there's a sill between outer space and the inner space. You step over it. And it's symbolic. You're invited now into this place. Our journey now goes here. And I think I shared with you, when I was a kid in New York, they're still there, but I experienced them as a kid in New York. You have the subways, which run underground until they don't. They come up and it's called the elevator, or the L, and then they're real loud when they're up here because they're on, wooden frame thing, like a roller coaster kind of thing. And then they go underground again, and you're plunged back into the dark. And if you're on the express train, it's whipping along. You just see the subway tiles going by, and all of a sudden there's sunlight. And then you're back down, and to a little kid especially, it's kind of it's sensory bombardment. Well, think of this way. So you're coming out of the fields and the woods, and now you're going into the tunnel, and maybe you come up for a while and your eyes are dazzled, and then you're back in the darkness. Or in some stories, it's just plain dark. And in some, it's dimly lit. That's Hollywood. They want to put sconces on the wall with torches in them, that kind of thing. Young Frankenstein. But mostly it's dark. And the point of this is that you're disoriented. And disorientation means to turn away from the rising sun. You've heard the expression, I need to orient myself or reorient myself. That means literally to turn toward the rising sun, to turn toward the east. When you're disoriented, you're turned away from the rising sun. Thus, everything's in shadow. You're perceiving shadow everywhere. So you're disoriented in this thing, and this is where I'm taking you today. And it works in the model of Holy Week. It works in distraction and divided attention and, let's say, mixed signals. A lot of mixed signals. Shadows will do this to you. Shadows on the wall. It's a terrifying thing. No, it's not. It's a hand puppet, Palm Sunday is about the joyous entry, triumphant entry into Jerusalem, where Jesus is received as a God king, received as a hero. This special attention to him lasts a week. And then we all know what happens. We put our trust in certain things, and they tend to lead to other things, which can look like betrayals and disappointments. We put our trust in the opinion of the world. Have you ever done this? I bet you have. Have you ever cared really, really a lot what other people thought of you, to the point where it informed your choices more than your own wisdom did? Okay? You're in for a shock, as you've discovered, if you do that. Everybody thinks you're great until you tell them no. Right? Oh, you're just absolutely wonderful. Can I chew off part of your soul? No. Well, then you're not who I thought you were. and I feel betrayed and disappointed and all of the rest of this. You see, when the heroic figure, who is you, is in this space across the threshold, in this dimly lit or altogether dark, cavernous place, what that person is encountering is frightening, is monstrous to a point, and is every bit contained within the depths of their own psyche. All our unhealed stuff. This is what is encountered in that place. Every part of us that feels less than, every part of us that feels found out or likely to be found out, every part of us that feels unworthy, incompetent, inept, what have you, all of this comes up. Who am I? I'm going to pause the story here and tell you a story related to it, but off the point of the particular journey, having to do with the Buddha. I know I've told you this before, but it fits in right here, okay? So you know the story of the Buddha, and if you don't, here it is. Briefly, Siddhartha Gautama, prince, swore off all of his power, swore off all of his wealth, when one day, having been raised in seclusion and privilege, he encounters out on the road suffering. He sees a beggar who is dying of hunger, and it rocks his world so much that he has to go on this spiritual quest. He does. He apprentices himself to various teachers. They tell him stuff, but it's not exactly what he wants. And so one day he sits down under a tree and he says, I will go no further until I know and know that I know the truth of all things, particularly myself. So he sits under a Bodhi tree and he is visited by temptations. And the temptations are very, very similar to the temptations that we're told Jesus was faced with. Temptations of wealth, temptations of power, temptations of sensuality, all come at him. And in his discipline, he fends them off. No, not for me, thanks. No, not for me, not for me. And they melt away, and they melt away. And the last temptation that really climbs up into his head is this. It's not wealth, and it's not power, and it's not sex, and it's not anything of a worldly nature. It's the suspicion that he's a fraud. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to be sitting here under this tree expecting to inherit the wisdom of the universe? And that's the hardest one for him to deal with, and it takes him the longest. But he does. And this is what elevates him to the place of the Buddha. And then the companion character to Buddhas is bodhisattvas, who are people who have reached that stage of enlightenment, but choose to return to earth to help others reach that state of enlightenment, which is a beautiful twist on the story. So my point in telling you that sidebar there is that this is the kind of stuff that you, the heroic figure, encounter in this underground crypt-like space, is all of the stuff you would expect, plus some stuff you don't expect, which is like, who are you really? Who are you really? And this is what you have to work through. Now, this is a model for spiritual growth everywhere, because no matter how ritualized your religious experience might be or have been in your life, it always conducts you to the threshold of your own issues. Sometimes people come to religious science, which this is, by the way. It's a little late to tell you now if you didn't want to be here. But it's like we say, if Los Angeles is not in your travel plans today, you'll want to disembark, you know. As you look down at the descending runway. Well, this is religious science, but if you decided that you didn't like religious science and this just wasn't for you and you want phooey, right? Just phooey. You want to pick something else? Well, we have a lovely array of symbols on the wall here representing major faith traditions. Pick you one or several. And you know what I promise? This is not a threat. This is a promise. They will lead you, whatever you follow, will lead you to the threshold of the same issues we will. Because we're not the ones doing the leading, and they're not the ones doing the leading. You're the one who asked for it. Because you came to this world wanting to know, who am I? Why am I here? What does it all mean? See? And to get to that, you have to sort through some stuff and kind of throw it over your shoulder like this, right? You have to go through the laundry. You have to go through all of the false appearances, all of the false evidence appearing real. That's an acronym for fear. There's another one, but I can't say it in a family service. But we go through the fear. We go through the suspicion that we're not enough, that we're somehow outside of the meaning of life, that somehow the fear of missing out, I guess. The party's somewhere else, where everybody's under the sunlight of divine love and all the rest of this, and we're out here in the rain. And so we have to work through that ourselves. And this is what we do in this dark space. And one last thing to tell you about the dark space. And this gets better. You have to come back next week for the payoff. And then Lisa's going to wrap it up with a bow on the last week, where I'll let her tell you what she's going to do, but you're going to love it. When you cross the threshold into the underground thing, and all like I've just said, and you face these issues within yourself, the first place you turn is to that mentor who came and got you at the door. And so what do I? They're not there. They're not there. They've vanished. They have vanished. Will we see them again? Tune in next week. But for now, they've vanished. And you talk about a feeling of betrayal. And we rant and rave and jump up and down because we want it both ways. We want the comfort and convenience and familiarity of the home, quote unquote, that we left, the figurative home that we left to go on this trip. And we want the power and prestige and heroism. And there may even be medals in it for us. There may even be trophies. There may even be, bling for us as the returning hero if we accomplish this major task. We want all of this together. And now the whole thing seems just nuts, because the one power that, presented all of this to us and said we could do it, and said not only that we could do it, but that we were the only one who could do it, has vanished. And that one represents our higher self. And you know what your higher self does when you're working in your lower self? It gets out of the way. That's why it's a higher self. If it were involved in the work in the lower self, it would lower itself. Does that make sense? The finite alone has wrought and suffered. The infinite lies stretched in smiling repose, said Emerson. We want the infinite to lie stretched in smiling repose. If it's working, and wrought is an old-fashioned way of saying work in the past tense. If it's working and sweating and grinding away with us, then it's involved in the problem at the level of the problem. And that's no good. If you're seeking a spiritual solution, you need there to be some part of life that's operating on a higher plane than the problem you're having. You especially need some part of yourself that's operating on the higher plane than the problem you're having. And that's why we call it a higher self. It's not a different self, it's a part of you that's never dropped into all the world's opinion. It's never been conditioned, it's never been relative. It has rather existed at the level of the absolute the whole time. And so when you go to do the work within yourself that's relative to time and space, it steps back to being what it is in the overarching protective sense of all of this, but does not involve itself in the daily labor. That's why it vanishes. And if it were there, all it would be a crutch, because we wouldn't do what needs doing. Finally, this, just to recap the point that's made in this teaching the whole time, the apparent paradox. We bring you in here We publish literature at you. We all speak, we teach classes, and we tell you everything's wonderful and God's all there is, and the universe is one whole system. And then you look around at the world and you say, it's a mess. It's a mess. It's this living paradox. Well, the reason it's a mess is because people have not accepted their own divine nature. They're too busy quibbling over the fine point of it, or who else doesn't have it, or who's to blame for what. And then we who think we're better than all of that, fall into that same conversation, and pretty soon it's like a dream, this idea of oneness. It's like a dream that was thought to be, but now we've awakened into the horror of the world such as we have it. The only thing standing between us and God is ourselves, and particularly our own opinions. We're rooted in opinions. I just heard a song by a band that's been around for 30 years. I get sometimes astonished because I try to follow the culture. I try to follow, especially music. There's a band that's been around for 30 years, and I just heard a song by them that came out like 30 years ago about spiritual matters. It's a song in a style you might not all gravitate toward. Kind of metal, you know. But there's a line in there that we are spirit. We are pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A. It's a Greek term, you know. Power. We are spirit, and we go around as if one foot were nailed down. Isn't that something? Can't quite reach it there, you know, because, well, if you had one foot nailed down, you'd be traveling in a circle, pretty much, wouldn't you? You know, you go around in a circle, and the boundary line of the circle describes your life, literally, as being inside of all of this. That comfortable, familiar, or if your foot's nailed down, uncomfortable, familiar space that we occupy, wanting more. You've heard the saying, if you and God are separated, who move? Who move? So all the work is done within the self to get back to the place of oneness. And this is what we're doing in this week, and especially in the last days of this week in the Christian tradition, especially starting on Friday. And as bloody, gruesome, awful as Good Friday is, pay some attention to Saturday. Pay some attention to the day between, the horror and the joy. Read up on what happened that day in mythology, in literature, in the story. And that's where we'll pick it up. Starting next Sunday, we'll start there. You'll come in on Sunday, we'll start with the Saturday story, and then bring it up through the resurrection and the coming out of the dark and what comes next. So again, next week, does the mentor return? Is our heroic figure safe? Is everything going to work out for them? Will everything be just peachy in the end? We'll find out together. But in the meantime, know that you're loved. Know that you are, in fact, one with the only power, the only presence there is. One last thing before I treat, and that was this, unrelated to the talk. I wanted to tell you that a great lion of religious science teaching made his transition. His name is Dr. J. Scott Neal, and he was a profoundly impactful figure in the Religious Science International movement for decades, and he will be missed by everyone who was his student and everyone who was influenced by the wide range of ministers that he helped educate and put out there into the world. So, all right, let's know together now. There is one life, one power, one presence, pure spirit, manifesting in the way that it does, and it's blown into town now as this gorgeous spring day with these high winds and little seed pod things coming out of the trees, and those migratory paths of those birds that Mary spoke of. They know what to do with the wind. They go with it, not against it. And if that means that they go a bit off course, it's fine with them. They'll find a Buc-ee's and have something to eat. But everything is moving as it should. The seeds that were silent are burst into bloom and become this that we perceive. And so I know for each one of us here, there's a springtime event occurring within us where we grow and blossom and ripen and mature as the cycle of the seasons, as the wheel of the year proceeds along. I affirm and know for everyone here health, happiness, and prosperity. I affirm and know self-awareness. I affirm and know an unfailing sense of the presence of Source as a companion, as a guide, and sometimes, as an apparent absence waiting to be filled by our faith, by our keeping up our part of the bargain that we made when we agreed to incarnate in form as members of the human family. As I affirm and know this for each one of us, I affirm and know it for everyone suffering on this earth, the people of Ukraine, the people without homes, people on journeys across the earth to find their right place. I affirm and know for the leaders everywhere, wisdom, compassion, mercy, clarity. It's not too much to ask. Too much.
Our Good Friday in Christian traditions.
As our usher makes his way to the back, thank you, Reverend David, for being our usher for the day. One thing I want to mention, Jesse earlier talked about our annual meeting that we just had. One of the things that was discussed during our annual meeting, which is every year, is the budget. It takes about $20,000 to keep this place running every month, between the mortgage, between insurance, of course, keeping the lights on, maintaining the grounds, things like that. It's about $20,000 a month. Right now, we have about 10% of our congregation that gives 70% of that budget. With that, we know that there is 90% of us that are still considering this our spiritual home, that receive their spiritual guidance and nourishment here. And so we just want to ask, just a little bit that you can give to us, just to make sure that we can not only maintain what we have, but also so that we could give you more. In order for us to be able to have more classes, to be able to have a thriving center, with more children's activities, more, food activities. We all love food. Shows, yes. Oh, how we all miss the shows, yes. With that being said, the only way that that can possibly occur is if our congregation finds it within their hearts to be just a little more generous to us. Just a few dollars. Again, we understand that everyone has various financial needs, and with that, we would never, ever want you to sacrifice your family and your home. But at the same time, hopefully you consider this your spiritual home. And so we would love for you to give here as well. And so I'm going to thank you in advance, knowing that because you consider this your spiritual home, because you consider this the place where you get your spiritual sustenance, that you are going to give to that just as you pay after every meal. I am going to know that you are giving not only of your time, of your energy, of your love, but also of your finances. And I invite you to say with me, divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all the good I am and have, all the good I give and receive. I am prosperous now, and so it is.
It's Palm Sunday or Hosanna Sunday. So here is Hosanna, loud Hosanna.
And the last thing that I just wanted to let you know that there's multiple ways to give. It's not just the basket. This is the 21st century. We accept PayPal. Apparently you can set up a thing directly from your bank that doesn't cost you or the center anything, where you can do a monthly contribution. You can also sign up in the bookstore for a monthly a credit card donation, which makes Jesse's first Sundays kind of long, but he'll do it. So it's not just the basket. We just wanted to let you know we've got a few ways to do that. And beyond that, I don't know. And trust me, I have no idea what I'm going to say at the end of the heroic journey because I'm not finished yet. So, although I did start taking notes today, I'm like, okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. So, if you want to know what the process of writing a sermon is, we write a bunch of notes down, and then we eliminate everything. And then we bring notes up here, and what we bring up here, we might not ever actually say. I used to give Jesse a really hard time about not even mentioning the title that he used, because he didn't today. But he did last week, so, it's interesting. And we all have different ways of doing it. All right. But it is springtime, and you want to go out and enjoy this beautiful day, right? So I'm going to encourage you to take one nice deep breath, breathe it all the way down. And as you relax and release that breath, know with me that there is one power, one presence, one life, one love. And each and every one of us lives that life. We are a part of that presence, and that power flows through us. That love moves in this world as us. We are divine channels for that love. And so, as we walk into spring, as the birds fly overhead to settle where they're going, and the trees and the flowers burst forth into bloom, what you have planted is growing. It is stretching up into the light. It is reaching for that divine light. It is reaching for that divine love. And I am knowing that there is plenty of love. There is plenty of water. There is plenty of nourishment for the divine you. That which you seek is seeking you. It is flowing into you now. I am inviting you to bloom, to flourish, to fly, to sing, to be the divine you. And I am grateful for the teaching that makes this possible, for this place where this teaching happens, for the ministers, for the practitioners, for the musicians, for the technology that makes it possible to do this, both here and wherever you are. We are literally a click away. And I am grateful for all of that. And I am grateful for this gorgeous spring day, and I commend you to it. And I release and know that it is so, and so it is.
Say with me now, something wonderful is happening through me.
Something is
wonderful is happening through me.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my body.
I feel it in my mind.
I feel it in my
I
mind.
feel it in everything I am.
I feel it in everything I am.
I choose it.
I choose it.
I trust it.
I trust it. I use it.
And
And I love it.
And
So it is.
All right.